Hello, humans. Today I wanted to talk about this guy right here and the problem that led to its existence. So this right here is a Fisher Space Pen bullet. It is a pen with one very specific feature that was actually designed to help the Americans with the space race. And there's a very specific reason why NASA needed a pen designed for them. So immediately after World War II, you have the Nazi scientists getting split up between the Soviets and the Americans, and everybody decides that the next great target is space travel. And the Soviets are winning. They have the first man-made object out of atmosphere. They have the first man-made object to do orbits. They have the first living animal testing in space. They were kind of winning right up until the Americans landed on the moon. But both sides started experiencing a problem with their pens. With a traditional ballpoint pen, ink doesn't actually flow onto paper when there's no gravity. Pens traditionally, whether it be ballpoint or fountain pens, use gravity to feed the ink into either the roller ball or in the case of fountain pens, they use gravity to feed down through the nib, right? And this is a fairly well-known thing. And that doesn't work in space because there's no gravity. There's nothing to pull the ink downwards into your roller ball, which leads to a very, very interesting problem. How exactly do we get accurate notes and measurements in space? And there's an old joke that I'm sure you've all seen that goes, NASA spent millions and millions of dollars devising a pressurized pen cartridge with special semi-solid ink material that they could write with underwater in extreme temperatures, -0 degrees, and the USSR used a pencil. But that's not because the Americans didn't consider using a pencil. That's because pencils use graphite, right? This is a graphite tip, and graphite is highly conductive. When you write with a pencil, something that can end up happening is you end up with pieces of graphite flaking off, which space stations have a lot of exposed electronics, and having random floating pieces of highly conductive material in those electronics is a great way to kill a bunch of space people. So that was actually not a very good solution. What the Americans ended up doing is they released a contract, and a pen maker by the name of Fisher, with the assistance of 2 other scientists, ended up creating the first space pen. You should be seeing it on screen right now. It worked, but what they ended up doing was having basically a pen that holds ink that you then pressurize the pen itself in order to force the ink out, and it would work for about 30 seconds because you pump it up. It's actually not that dissimilar to a Nerf gun. You pump it up to build up pressure, and then you can release the pressure through writing. And this was unveiled in and around 1965. And it was okay, but it wasn't great. So what the Fisher Pen Company ended up doing is going back to the drawing board. And what they did instead of doing something fancy with the pen, because as you can see, this is a fairly simple bullet pen, right? Has a longer cap than most. It fits smaller than most when it's all folded up. And it's about average size when it's unfolded. But the truth is, there's one thing about this pen that makes it very, very special. The cartridge. So what they ended up doing is, instead of trying to redesign the pen itself to hold pressure or do whatever else and work with any cartridge, they designed specialized cartridges. So how this works is you have a pressure nitrogen gas compressed into it. You have basically a spacer that gets pushed back and forth by equalizing the pressure between your pressurized gas and your pen ink. And then your pen ink itself isn't actually liquid. It's this material that, when friction is applied to it, basically sloughs off onto the roller ball. So it acts similarly enough to a liquid to where you can use it in a ballpoint pen with a tungsten carbide ball, but it's not a liquid when it's inside of there. So if I were to puncture this, which I'm not going to do because these are relatively speaking expensive and I don't want to, but if you were to puncture this, what ends up happening is you have this like jelly material. It's more solid than liquid. It's kind of neat, and it works fairly well, and it did what they needed it to do, which is allow something that can be used underwater because it's not a liquid, and it won't just sort of slough off. So it's not a solid, so it works underwater and through grease because, again, it's not a liquid. It's not going to sit on top of the grease or fight with the grease at all. You can pressurize it, which means that you can use it in a whole ton of different gravity situations. You can write upside down with it, and you can use it in extreme temperature range because the liquid doesn't change properties based on temperature to the same degree that like a traditional pen or gel would. So it's actually really cool. It also allows you to have a lot more dense pigmentation, which means you can get a lot more ink in the same space, which is why it says that it lasts 3 times longer, right? And these come in a couple of different sizes, the pressurized cartridges. This one here is actually designed to fit a standard Parker style refill, which is what I use mostly, right? This one here, this pen in particular, is actually the smaller version, so it does not take the same size cartridge, but you can buy refill cartridges for it without too much difficulty. Oh yeah, and the Soviets, like I mentioned, experienced electronic problems and ended up actually commissioning Fisher, or they basically designed their own Fisher Space Pen eventually, but the Fisher Space Pen cartridges are actually still used to this day. Sorry, I'm just trying to pull this out without destroying the packaging. Are actually still used to this day on manned space missions because whilst you can do a lot of the note-taking now in with electronic forms, there still is a desire to use pens and regular written notes for a whole bunch of systems and things. So there is actually a benefit to still keeping and commissioning these pens to be made. You can see there's some texturing on sort of this barrel section, which is actually a pretty positive grip. Without it being capped, this is quite a short pen, but once you cap it, it is fairly full length. This is actually a fairly comfortable thing to write on. This is the stainless steel version. You have an O-ring, which holds the cap in place, so no threading or anything like that, and then you de-thread the 2 sections. Oh, maybe it is a medium. It is. My apologies. So you can see, they're just going to bump into each other. It is comparatively a fairly small cartridge, and it does require an adapter. You can see that little plastic piece at the bottom to use in a regular, quote-unquote, Parker-style refill, which isn't really the end of the world, especially since you're getting so much more ink because the ink is so much denser in these things. But, like, for a medium-sized ink cartridge, this is a fairly small pen, and you can see it just very simply unthreads. There's no springs, nothing that's going to act weird. Inside is this really nice brass. It seals up tightly. And boom, just like that, easiest thing in the world, you can get your refill in. One thing I will say, these lack pocket clips, which is fine because these are designed to be used with sort of space, is designed to be used with space vests, or what are they called, the astronaut outfits? Suits, space suits. So they do work for that because you have a special, elastic pocket that'll hold it quite a bit better. For me, I generally use this guy with those Right in the Rain packets, and some of them come with a little elastic piece for the pen. So this actually does get held nicely in that little plastic section, which is pretty cool. Real quick, some size comparisons. So here it is next to my Phoenix TI5. So this is the pen that I use every single. Actually, this also takes Parker refills. Let me show you a quick size comparison just between like a regular Parker refill and the Fisher Space Pen refills. So you can see it is noticeably shorter, right? And most of that is this little plastic section that allows it to work with clicking mechanisms and the like. But still, it is noticeably shorter, which I just think is kind of cool. So, just take the cartridge out for just one quick moment. So I'm going to do close for, it's just going to roll. I'm sorry, this is a slanted space. I don't really have any way of holding it up. Maybe a guitar pick will do it. Cool. So you can see, closed especially, it is quite a bit smaller than the Finex TI5. And here it is next to a regular number 2 pencil, quite like nearly half the size of the number 2 pencil, right? This is quite a small pen. And then here we have a standard Sharpie, industrial. And again, quite a bit smaller than the Sharpie. And here we have my still form Aeon. Again, noticeably shorter than the Aeon. And this is, in my opinion, a relatively short feeling pen. I like it. It's nicely weighted, but it is relatively short feeling. So capped especially, you can see it's just small. I'm just going to do, oops, my camera stand. I'm just going to do 2 more size comparisons real quick and then I can move on. So this is a Zebra F301, and you can see smaller than the F301. And here is my General Supply Co. ballpoint, I think is just what they call it, which fair enough, that, or not ballpoint, fountain pen is what I believe they call it. That's what it is. It's pretty cool. Now we're going to do some open comparisons. So this doesn't post, so I'm just going to leave it unposted. There's no real point in doing that, but I'm going to do it anyways because I think it's funny. And now's the part where we really notice the difference, right? So post, this is how you would write with this. This is correct. So it has now become bigger than actually it's bigger than both of them. Not by a huge amount, but noticeably bigger than both of them, which is pretty cool, right? And it makes it a lot more comfortable for writing because writing with a small pen is actually fairly uncomfortable. So. And then we're going to do our still form Aeon. And you can see it is now shorter. It is still wider, but it is shorter. And our Sharpie posted. It is still a little bit smaller than the Sharpie, but not by a huge amount. And you can refill it, which you can't. Well, you can't get those stainless steel Sharpies. I need to get another one of those. I used to have one, but it got destroyed. And finally, up against our number 2 pencil. It is quite a bit smaller than the number 2 pencil still, but compared to my T5, it is slightly smaller, but it is pretty well the same size as the T5, which is pretty nice. Like, this is the pen that I carry pretty well every day. I really do like this pen. And they take the same cartridges, more or less. This one here is going to get longer life out of its cartridges because this one here has colorful cartridges in it right now, just because I like getting colorful cartridges. I think that's pretty cool. All right. Now, real quick, we're going to do a writing sample. And real quick, we're just going to do a writing sample with it. So here we are. Hello, world. So it feels like it's holding up pretty well. It feels very smooth, but you can actually see it does take a little bit, like at the start of every letter, unless I start off pushing off fairly hard like I did with world, but you can see at the start of my O's and like the top of that H, the start of that A, it does take a little bit for the pen to start moving. So if you're writing very lightly, there is absolutely a scenario where this pen starts to feel a little bit off. But that is true of most pens. Like, it's quite uncommon to get an ink that flows so freely that you can, like, absolutely just barely kiss the paper and it writes consistently every time. And, like, it feels really smooth. I've gotten some pen cartridges that feel really unsmooth or just hideously crunchy almost. This is a very, very smooth feeling cartridge, which makes a lot of sense, right? Anything made on US military contract, and I'm fairly certain NASA contracts are considered military contracts, are going to be high quality. So I do think this is a really, really cool product. I would absolutely recommend it. There's many different versions, many different colorations. There's small ones, big ones, whole 9 yards for the bullet pens, which honestly, even if you don't really want like a space pen specifically, one made by Fisher for the space missions, the pen cartridges alone are absolutely high quality and worth getting. So yeah, my overall conclusion, I would strongly recommend this. I don't, especially if you're somebody who does a lot of outdoors work, working potentially in wet conditions, this will write on stuff. This will write on anything you need it to write on. It's comfortable, it takes up minimal pack space, it's easy to use. Like, absolutely, very strongly recommend getting yourself a Fisher Space Pen. Super cool, and the history on them is super duper neat, right? Like, the solution to a problem is always going to be one of the two major causes of innovation, the other being war, which is in and of itself a problem in need of a solution, right? So, necessity being the mother of creativity leads to some really, really cool things that are cool in very, very subtle ways. And that is exactly what I feel the Fisher Space Pen is. So, yeah, I would definitely recommend picking one up. They're not cheap, but they're not overly expensive either. I mean, you can play around with different versions, and I'm pretty sure there's like gold-plated ones, so the price can get crazy if you want it to, but it doesn't have to. That's kind of all I have to say. Stay safe and have fun out there. Peace.